Hi, and welcome back to Crochet Every Day with Judy. Today we're reading from Heidi, starting with Chapter 9. Mr. Sesamon hears of things which are new to him. A few days after these events, there was great commotion and much running up and down stairs in Mr. Sesamon's house. The master had just returned, and Sebastian and Tinette were busy carrying up one package after another from the carriage. Mr. Sesamon always brought back a lot of pretty things for his home. He himself had not waited to do anything before going in to see his daughter. Father and daughter greeted each other with warm affection. Then Mr. Sesamon held out his hand to Heidi, who had stolen away into the corner, and said kindly to her, "And this is our little Swiss girl. Come and shake hands with me. That's right. Now tell me, are Clara and you good friends with one another, or do you get angry and quarrel and then cry and make it up, and then start quarreling again on the next occasion?" "No, Clara is always kind to me," answered Heidi. "And Heidi," put in Clara quickly, "has not once tried to quarrel." "That's all right. I am glad to hear it," said her father as he rose from his chair. "But you must excuse me, Clara, for I want my dinner. I have had nothing to eat all day. Afterwards, I will show you all the things I have brought home with me." He found Miss Rottenmeier in the dining room superintending the preparation for his meal, and when he had taken his place, she sat down opposite to him, looking the picture of bad news. "What am I to expect, Miss Rottenmeier?" he asked. "You greet me with an expression that quite frightens me. What is the matter? Clara seems cheerful enough." "Mr. Sesamon," began the lady in a solemn voice, "it is a matter which concerns Clara. We have been frightfully imposed upon." "Indeed? In what way?" asked Mr. Sesamon, as he went on calmly drinking his coffee. "We had decided, as you remember, to get a companion for Clara, and as I knew how anxious you were to have only those who were well behaved and nicely brought up about her, I thought I would look for a little Swiss girl. I hope to find one such as I have often read about, who, born as it were of the mountain air, lives and moves without touching the earth." "Still, I think even a Swiss child would have to touch the earth if she wanted to go anywhere," remarked Mr. Sesamon. "Otherwise she would have been given wings instead of feet." "Ah, Mr. Sesamon, you know what I mean," exclaimed Miss Rottenmeier. "I have been disgracefully imposed upon." "If you only knew the kind of people and animals she has brought into the house during your absence, the tutor can tell you more about that." "Animals? What am I to understand by animals, Miss Rottenmeier?" "It is past understanding. The whole behavior of the child would be past understanding, if it were not that at times she is evidently not in her right mind." Mr. Sesamon had attached very little importance to what was told him up till now, but this was more serious. It might be harmful to his own child. He looked very narrowly at the lady opposite to assure himself that the mental weakness was not on her side. At that moment the door opened, and the tutor was announced. "Ah, here is someone," explained Mr. Sesamon, "who will help to clear up matters for me. Take a seat," he continued, as he held out his hand to the tutor. "You will drink a cup of coffee with me, and now tell me, what is the matter with this child that has come to be a companion to my daughter?" The tutor began in his usual roundabout way, and after several efforts to get a simple statement from him, Mr. Sesamon gave up in despair. "Excuse me, my dear sir, do not disturb yourself, but I must. I think my daughter will be wanting me," he said, and quickly left the room and took care not to return. He sat down beside his daughter in the study and turned to Heidi, who had risen. "Little one, will you bring me a glass of water?" he said. "Fresh water?" asked Heidi. Yes, as fresh as you can get it," he answered. Heidi promptly disappeared. "And now, my dear little Clara," he said, drawing his chair nearer and taking her hand in his, "try to answer my questions clearly. What kind of animals has your little companion brought into the house, and why does Miss Rottenmeier think that she is not always in her right mind?" Clara told her father everything about the tortoise and the kittens, and explained to him what Heidi had said the day Miss Rottenmeier had been put in such a fright. Mr. Sesamon laughed heartily at her recital. "So you do not want me to send the child home again?" he asked. "You are not tired of having her here?" "Oh, no, no," Clara exclaimed. "Please do not send her away. Time has passed much more quickly since Heidi has been here, for something new happens every day. It used to be so dull." "That's all right then, and here comes your little friend. Have you brought me some good fresh water?" he asked as Heidi handed him a glass. "Yes, fresh from the pump," answered Heidi. "You did not go yourself to the pump," said Clara. "Yes, I did. I had to go a long way. There were such a lot of people at the first pump that I went farther down the street, but there were just as many at the second pump. I was able to get some water at the one in the next street, and the gentleman with the white hair asked me to give his kind regards to Mr. Sesamon." You have had quite a successful expedition, said Mr. Sesame, laughing. And who was the gentleman? He was passing, and when he saw me, he stood still and said, "As you have a glass, will you give me a drink? To whom are you taking the water?" When I said, "To Mr. Sesamon," he laughed very much, and then he gave me that message for you, and also said he hoped you would enjoy the water. I wonder who it was that sent me such good wishes. Tell me what he was like, said Mr. Sesamon. He was kind and laughed, and he had a thick gold chain and a gold thing hanging from it with a large red stone and a horse's head at the top of his stick. "It's the doctor!" exclaimed Clara and her father at the same moment. That evening Mr. Sesamon told Miss Rottenmeier that he intended to keep Heidi. He found the child in a perfectly right state of mind, he said, and his daughter liked her as a companion. "I want the child to be treated kindly in every way," he continued, "and I do not want her peculiarities to be looked upon as crimes. If you find her too much for you alone, I can hold out a prospect of help, for I am shortly expecting my mother here on a long visit. As you know, she can get along with anybody." "Oh, yes, I know," replied Miss Rottenmeier, but there was no tone of relief in her voice as she thought of the coming help. Mr. Sesamon was only home for a short time. He left for Paris again before 2 weeks were up. He had just gone when a letter came from his mother announcing her arrival on the following day. Clara was overjoyed and talking so much about her grandmother that evening that Heidi too began to call her Grandmamma. Chapter 10. Another Grandmother. There was much expectation and preparation about the house on the following evening. Tinette had a new white cap on her head. Sebastian collected all the footstools he could find and placed them in convenient spots. Miss Rottenmeier, very straight and dignified, went about inspecting everything. When the carriage drove up to the door, Tinette and Sebastian ran down the steps, followed with a slower and more stately step by Miss Rottenmeier. Heidi had been sent up to her room and ordered to remain there until she was called. She had not long to wait before Tinette put her head in and said abruptly, "Go downstairs into the study." As Heidi opened the study door, she heard a kind voice say, "Ah, here comes the child. Come along and let me have a good look at you." Heidi walked up to her and said very distinctly in her clear voice, "Good evening." The grandmother patted Heidi's cheeks and smiled at her, and the child looked back at her with steady, serious eyes. Everything about the grandmother attracted her, so that she could not turn her eyes away. She had such beautiful white hair, and 2 long lace ends hung down from the cap on her head and waved gently about her face every time she moved, as if a soft breeze were blowing round her. That gave Heidi a peculiar feeling of pleasure. "And what is your name, child?" the grandmother now asked. "I am always called Heidi, but as I am now to be called Adelaide, I will try to take care." "Mrs. Sesamon will no doubt agree with me," Miss Rottenmeier interrupted, "that it was necessary to choose a name that could be pronounced easily, if only for the sake of the servants." "My good Rottenmeier," replied Mrs. Sesamon, "if a person is called Heidi and has grown accustomed to that name, I call her Heidi." Miss Rottenmeier was always very much annoyed that the old lady continually addressed her by her surname only, but it did no good to object, for the grandmother always went her own way. The next afternoon, while Clara was resting, the grandmother went up to Miss Rottenmeier's room and gave a loud knock at the door. After a few minutes, Miss Rottenmeier opened the door and drew back in surprise at this unexpected visit. "Where is the child, and what is she doing all this time?" asked Mrs. Sesamon. "She is sitting in her room, where she could well employ herself if she had the least idea of making herself useful. But you have no idea, Mrs. Sesamon, of the out-of-the-way things this child imagines and does, things which I could hardly repeat in good society." "I should do the same if I had to sit in there like that child, I can tell you. I doubt if you would then like to repeat in good society what I did. Go and get the child and bring her to my room. I have some pretty books with me that I should like to give her." "That is just the misfortune," said Miss Rottenmeier with a despairing gesture. "What use are books to her? She has not been able to learn even her ABC all the long time she has been here. If the tutor had not the patience of an angel, he would have given up teaching her long ago." "That is very strange," said Mrs. Sesamon. "She does not look to me like a child who would be unable to learn her alphabet. However, bring her to me now. She can at least amuse herself with the pictures in the books." Heidi soon appeared. She gazed with open-eyed delight and wonder at the beautiful colored pictures in the books which the grandmother gave her to look at. All of a sudden, as she turned a page to a fresh picture, the child gave a cry. For a moment or two she looked at it with brightening eyes, then the tears began to fall, and at last she burst into sobs. The grandmother looked at the picture. It represented a green pasture full of young animals, some grazing and others nibbling at the shrubs. In the middle was a shepherd leaning upon his staff and looking on at his happy flock. The whole scene was bathed in golden light, for the sun was just sinking below the horizon. The grandmother laid her hand kindly on Heidi's. "Don't cry, dear child, don't cry," she said. "The picture has perhaps reminded you of something. But see, there is a beautiful story to the picture, which I will tell you this evening. And there are other stories of all kinds to read and to tell again. But now we must have a little talk together, so dry your tears and come and stand in front of me so that I may see you well. There, now we are happy again." But it was some little time before Heidi could overcome her sobs. The grandmother gave her time to recover herself, saying cheering words to her now and then. "There, it's all right now, and we are quite happy again." When at last she saw that Heidi was growing calmer, she said, "Now I want you to tell me something. How are you getting on in your schoolwork? Do you like your lessons, and have you learned a great deal?" "Oh, no," replied Heidi, sighing, "but I knew beforehand that it was not possible to learn." "What is it you think impossible to learn?" "Why, to read. It is too hard." "You don't say so, and who told you that?" "Peter told me, and he knew all about it, for he had tried and could not learn it." "Peter must be a very odd boy then. But listen, Heidi, we must not always go by what Peter says. We must try for ourselves. I am certain that you did not give all your attention to the tutor when he was trying to teach you your letters." "It's of no use," said Heidi in the tone of one who was ready to endure what could not be endured. "Listen to what I have to say," commanded the grandmother. "You have not been able to learn your alphabet because you believed what Peter said. Now you must believe what I tell you, and I tell you that you can learn to read in a very little while, as many children do, who are made like you and not like Peter. You see that picture with the shepherd and the animals? Well, as soon as you are able to read, you shall have that book for your own, and then you will know all about the sheep and the goats and what the shepherd did, and the wonderful things that happened to him. You will like that, won't you?" Heidi had listened with eager attention to the grandmother's words, and now with a sigh exclaimed, "Oh, if only I could read now!" "It won't take you long now to learn, I can see. Now we must go down to Clara. Bring the books with you." And hand in hand the two went over to the study. Since the day when Heidi had tried to go home, a change had come over her. She had at last understood that she could not go home when she wished, as Detta had told her, but that she would have to stay on in Frankfurt for a long, long time, perhaps forever. She had also understood that Mr. Sessaman would think it ungrateful of her if she wished to leave, and she believed that the grandmother and Clara would think the same. But the weight of trouble on the little heart grew heavier and heavier. She could no longer eat her food, and every day she grew a little paler. She lay awake for long hours at night, for as soon as she was alone and everything was still around her, the picture of the mountain with its sunshine and flowers rose vividly before her eyes. When at last she fell asleep, it was to dream of the rocks and the snowfield turning crimson in the evening light. When she awoke in the morning, she would think herself back at the hut and prepare to run joyfully out into the sun. And then, here was her large bed, and here she was in Frankfurt, far, far away from home. And Heidi would often weep for a long time with her face buried in the pillow so that no one would hear her. Heidi's unhappiness did not escape the grandmother's notice. She let some days go by to see if the child grew brighter and lost her downcast appearance. But as matters did not mend, and she saw that many mornings Heidi had evidently been crying before she came downstairs, she took her again into her room one day, and drawing the child to her, said, "Now tell me, Heidi, what is the matter? Are you in trouble?" But Heidi was afraid if she told the truth that the grandmother would think her ungrateful and would stop being so kind to her, so she answered, "I can't tell you." "Well, could you tell Clara about it?" "Oh, no, I can't tell anyone," said Heidi in so positive a tone, and with a look of such trouble on her face that the grandmother felt full of pity for the child. "Then, dear child, let me tell you what to do. You know that when we are in great trouble and cannot speak about it to anybody, we must turn to God and pray Him to help, for He can deliver us from everything that worries us. You understand that, do you not? You say your prayers every evening to the dear God in heaven, and thank Him for all He has done for you, and pray Him to keep you from all evil, do you not?" No, I never say any prayers, answered Heidi. Have you never been taught to pray, Heidi? Do you not even know what it means? I used to say prayers with the first grandmother, but that is a long time ago, and I have forgotten them. That is the reason, Heidi, that you are so unhappy, because you know no one who can help you. Think what a comfort it is when we feel sad to be able at any moment to go and tell everything to God. He can help us and give us everything that will make us happy again. A sudden gleam of joy came into Heidi's eyes. May I tell him everything? Everything? Yes, everything, Heidi, everything. Heidi drew her hand away, which the grandmother was holding affectionately between her own, and said quickly, May I go? Yes, of course, was the answer, and Heidi ran out of the room and into her own. Sitting down on a stool, she folded her hands together and told God about everything that was making her so sad and unhappy, and begged him earnestly to help her and to let her go home to her grandfather. It was about a week after this that the tutor asked Mrs. Sessam's permission for an interview with her. He told her that Heidi had at last learned to read and, unlike most beginners, had read correctly from the first. Mrs. Sessamon was delighted. When the tutor had gone, she went down to the study to make sure of the good news. Heidi was sitting beside Clara, reading aloud to her. She was growing more and more delighted with the new world that was open to her as the black letters grew alive and turned into men and things and exciting stories. That same evening, Heidi found the large book with the beautiful pictures lying on her plate when she took her place at the table. When she looked questioningly at the grandmother, Mrs. Sessamon nodded kindly to her and said, Yes, it's yours now. Mine to keep? Always? Even when I go home? Said Heidi, blushing with pleasure. Yes, of course. Yours forever, the grandmother assured her. Tomorrow we will begin to read it. But you are not going home yet, Heidi, not for years, put in Clara. When grandmother goes away, I shall want you to stay with me. When Heidi went to her room that night, she had another look at her book before she went to bed. From that day forth, her chief pleasure was to read the tales which belonged to the beautiful pictures over and over again. If the grandmother said, as they were sitting together in the evening, Now Heidi will read aloud to us, Heidi was delighted, for reading was no trouble to her now. When she read the tales aloud, the scenes seemed to grow more beautiful and distinct, and then grandmother would explain and tell her more about them still. We'll stop there today and start tomorrow with Chapter 11. Thank you for listening.